And I understood what caused it. And then I understood the dynamics of the next bubble, the housing bubble, and that phony economy. And the problem is, we have a much bigger economic crisis coming in the next few years. It's going to be a currency crisis. It's going to be a crisis where the world stops lending us money. I mean, right now, everybody is talking about Greece. Oh, Greece has borrowed too much money. They can't pay it back. Greece is tiny compared to what we've done. I mean, we are the mother of fiscal irresponsibility, and we're going to have a real crisis. And when the dollar collapses, that means prices are going to go through the roof for every American. The real cost of the bailouts, the real cost of the stimulus is going to be borne in a debased standard of living. Prices are going to go through the roof, interest rates are going to go through the roof, and every single American is going to feel that right in his pocketbook, because his savings are going to be worth less. If he still has a job, his wages are going to be worth less. And of course, if you're living on unemployment or Social Security, you're not going to be able to buy much with those checks, because prices are going to go up. And before we end up with that runaway inflation, if I can somehow get to Washington and convince the other congressmen and senators that they're the source of our problems, that it's not a failure of capitalism or a failure of free markets, it's a failure of socialism, of central government planning, of central banking, of electing people whose only job is to perpetuate their own careers. Because unfortunately, getting reelected requires people to do very foolish things. I mean, they're acting in their own interest. We need people in Washington who don't care if they get reelected. And I don't. You know, to be honest with you, I wish I didn't have to get elected in the first place. I would rather stay in Connecticut than have to, commute to Washington, D.C. every week. I wish that people were doing a good job in Washington so I didn't have to go there and do it for them. But unfortunately, if we leave the situation to politicians, it's going to end in disaster. Because all they care about is postponing the pain. All they care about is trying to make sure that the crisis happens after the next election. I don't want the crisis to happen. I want to swallow the bitter medicine now so the economy can really get better. And what do we need to do? Right? We have to understand what are the structural problems with our economy. It's real simple. After years and years of artificially low interest rates, we borrow too much money. We consume too much. Where are all the factories? They're gone. We don't produce enough. We're consuming what other people produce. We're living a phony standard of living. Why aren't we producing here? Why are all the factories in Connecticut shut down? They used to be very profitable. They used to be, why? Well, we layered them up with regulations and taxes and all kinds of cumbersome rules that it's too efficient. We can't produce efficiently anymore. So we've got to go back to a real economy. We have to make stuff and we have to save our money. And we're not going to do that with current policy. We need to reform monetary policy, and we need to slash the size of government right now. Not in the future. We have to understand that the bigger the government gets, the smaller the economy gets. And you've got, Barack Obama saying, well, we need to run up the deficit now so that we can reduce it later. That's nonsense. That's like saying, I want to go on a diet, but first I'm going to gain 200 pounds. If you're overweight, you go on a diet right now, the government is too big. So we've got to cut. We've got to cut departments, eliminate them completely. We've got to get rid of agencies. We've got to look at what we're paying our employees in the government. I was shocked. I found out about a month ago that the average government worker is making twice the average private sector. They work for us. That doesn't make any sense. You pay your employees less than you, not more than you. Right? Your employers are taking all the risks. So we got to cut the head count. We got to cut the salaries. Of course, a lot of it is in all the generous perks that they promise, but none of this stuff is funded. It's all going to come out of future taxes, and so the government is going to have to make itself much smaller. And the politicians don't want to acknowledge that because somebody's benefits are going to get cut. People are going to have to get smaller checks from the government. But if we don't do that, if we're not honest and admit that the government can't afford this because we the people can't afford it, they've made promises that we can't keep. The only way they can keep these promises is with printing press money, running the money off the printing press. And that's what's going to happen. I even heard, Ben Bernanke spoke the other day, and I was watching him in Congress, and he actually thinks, he really believes that the government could create economic growth, can create demand by printing money. Demand comes from supply. If we don't have anything, we can't buy anything. And just printing pieces of paper and spreading it over the country isn't going to create any products. It's not going to create any real wealth. That only comes from hard work, it comes from savings, it comes from capital, and none of this is going to happen if the government is distorting the economy and preventing these things from happening. And someone also has to go to Washington and kind of educate our leaders to understand. They're trying to figure out, they want to solve the healthcare crisis by passing a healthcare bill, and they don't even understand why healthcare is so expensive in the first place. They don't understand it's their own foolish policies, their own incentives, their own subsidies, their own mandates, their own regulations that have driven healthcare costs through the roof. If the government had stayed out of it, healthcare prices would be falling, just like computer prices, or cell phone prices, or plasma TV prices. Anywhere the government is out, the free market works. It's only where the government entangles itself, like education or healthcare, where you see costs running out of control. But what do our politicians want to do? They just want to make the problem worse. They want to get government more involved in healthcare. What's that going to do? That's just going to make prices go up even faster, and ultimately we're going to have to ration the care because we simply can't afford it. So if somebody can go to Washington, like me, what's different about me and the other candidates is I have a unique understanding of economics and business. I'm a businessman, I'm an entrepreneur, I've grown a business, I understand how government regulation stifles business. I'm dealing with regulators right now that breathe down my neck every day. I could barely go to the bathroom without checking with my lawyer to make sure I'm not violating one of the FINRA rules. And I got 7 employees in my company. The only thing they do is comply with government regulations. And then I have to pay a lawyer. My lawyer earns more than I used to make, 5 years ago. And why do and it's all because I have to understand how to comply with these rules. I mean, the lawyers in Washington write the rules, and they're so complicated because they make money for all their friends that are still in the private sector. So I understand all the things that government does to screw up business, and my business is economics. Right? I understand how economies grow, and I understand why they don't grow. In fact, I got a book coming out in April called How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. So, and I've written books. I'm recognized as somebody who's an expert on economics, who's one of the few people in the world to have forecast the financial crisis accurately. So I think I can bring that to Washington and try to convince the people there that everything they've done is wrong, that the people that they're listening to are wrong, that Ben Bernanke doesn't know what he's talking about, that Timothy Geithner, these guys have never gotten anything wrong in their entire lives. And they're listening to people from Goldman Sachs and other firms. They don't care about the country. They care about themselves. And they've conned our leaders into subsidizing their bonuses with our money. And they told them it's in the national interest. When Henry Paulson came to Congress and said, we need to bail out AIG. We need to bail these firms out. No, we didn't. We didn't need to do it. We would have been much better off if we didn't. The problem was there's not a congressman or a senator who was in office that understood it. So they blindly follow him because they don't know anything about economics. They can't pull that off when I'm in the Congress. I'll be able to explain to the other senators why he's full of it, and not to allow it to happen. So anyway, I want to take some questions, but just like Mark, I want to go to Washington and do what needs to be done. And I know a lot of people have run as Republicans, and sometimes they talk a good talk, and they fool you. They say what you want to hear, but the minute they get elected, they do exactly what the Democrats do, because they're not Republicans, they're politicians. Whether they're Democrat or Republicans, once they get into Washington, that's exactly where they want to be. They want to stay there, and how do they stay there? They grow their fiefdoms, they get more power, they find a way to get the special interest money, to stay in office, and so they never do it. They don't shrink government. It's, Democrats probably have a really good time in Washington because they love government. They want it to be bigger, and that's how they get there. They promise bigger government, and boy, they deliver. But the Republicans, it's hard to be there because, if you're a real Republican, you don't like government. You don't want to be in government. You know that government just screws things up. The only reason I want to go there is to prevent the government from doing that. And I said, I don't want to write a single piece of legislation. I just want to repeal legislation. And, when people say to me, well, Peter, you don't have any experience writing legislation. Fine, I don't need it. When it comes to repealing legislation, I've got exactly the same amount of experience as everybody else because it's never been done. We've been writing legislation for 100 years. Let's start carrying this stuff up. Let's understand that every time we repeal a bill, we restore more power and more rights to individuals. Because that's all they're doing, is restricting our liberties and screwing up the market. So if I go there, you can be assured that I'm not going to check my principles at the door. I don't want to stay in Washington. As I said, I really would prefer not to be there. One term is really all I want. I don't even think I have more. If I can't do what needs to be done in 6 years, it's too late. Right? We don't have 6 years to solve these problems. We need to solve them. And if I can solve them in 6 years, that I don't need to stay in Washington. I can come back to Connecticut. And if I can't, I'm just wasting my time anyway, and I might as well, hunker down with everybody else. But anyway.